Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to this bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, they really do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into today's bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter. I'm from a cattle and sheep ranch in Montana. I also have 4 saddle horses. The ranch that my cousin and I own is about 4,700 acres, consisting of flat crop and hayfields, stretching on both sides of the Yellowstone River. The ranch is located miles 11 northeast of the town of Savage. We rent a ranch that's 38 miles upriver from us. This is where the incident occurred. The leased ranch is huge, comprising over 13,000 acres. The folk that own it are multimillionaires from Oregon who only visit a few times a year. The ranch has very rough terrain and 3 small creeks running through it. On the very northwest corner of the land, it flattens out, and there's an old corral system. There's also a long vacant house nearby, a drawer. We had leased this ranch since the mid-2000s and had no trouble until about 5 years ago. It's normal to lose a few cows in the Yellowstone, but we lost 130 since 2016. We lost 17 cows the year that my horse was killed. Around half of these cattle we were able to locate. The animals that we found were pretty eaten up by coyote, but a few we found were not. These carcasses looked a lot like other cattle mutilations, with the skin around the eyes, the ears, and the udder completely missing. It was highly unusual to lose this many cattle, as they were at home throughout the winter, and there were no natural predators for them in eastern Montana, especially one that could kill a full-grown cow. All of the cattle that went missing were cows, and always between 3 and 5 years old. This event took place at the end of June of last year. We had trucked the cattle to the ranch 2 weeks prior, and I was checking on them that day. Usually my cousin or his son rode out with me, but they were moving the irrigation pivot that day, so I was alone. I parked my pickup next to the corral and unloaded my horse. This was about 9:30 in the morning. My horse's name was Ace. He was a very large horse that weighed a whole ton and stood 19 hands tall. He was a quarter perch-on. Ace was not very quick or fast, but he had great endurance, and you could ride him all day through the roughest country, and he didn't tire. It was a pretty usual day until about 1 p.m., when I saw something that just didn't belong. About a mile away, I could see an animal bounding up a hill. My initial reaction was a deer, because it was about as big as one, but had the proportions more like a mountain lion. I tried to ride closer to whatever it was, but I couldn't find it. It was odd, but not that crazy, so I just put the thought in the back of my head. The day continued normally until I returned to my pickup and trailer. As I went to load Ace, I noticed that the rear axle of the trailer had come apart. Keep in mind that I had not used it till earlier that morning, so there was no reason for that to happen. It was getting pretty late, around 8 o'clock at night. And it took about an hour and a half to get back to the house, so I decided to leave Ace in the trailer there and take the pickup home. The corral fence was all right, but the gate latch was rusted shut to where you couldn't close it. I had a roll of barbed wire in the pickup, so I used that to secure the gate after putting Ace into it. As I drove home, I noticed a few large lights in the opposite direction from the corral. They resembled combine lights, even though they were farther apart and brighter. Also, there would be no reason for a combine to be up here. I arrived home at about 10:30 without having any trouble. The next morning, my cousin, his son, and I all rode up together to fix the axle and get Ace back. When we finally got to the corral, we saw that Ace wasn't there. The wire holding the gate shut had not been meddled with, so there was no logical way that he could have escaped. The corral had not been used in decades, so there was some grass growing inside, but that day the grass was all turned up, and you could see where Ace had run around for a while. This was quite unusual, as Ace was always quite the calm horse. We looked for him the whole day, and could not find him, but we were severely limited because of the fact that we were on foot. The next day, myself and my cousin's son returned with a fixed trailer and 2 horses to continue the search for Ace. I had also brought my dog Daisy. We split up to cover more ground, and every 2 hours we'd meet up. At around 3 in the afternoon, while I was riding around the rim of a steep wooded draw, Daisy suddenly scurried down into the draw. I tied the horse I was riding, Penny, to an old cedar tree and followed Daisy down. The sides of this draw were incredibly steep, and I was struggling to make it down there on foot. For a horse as big as Ace, it would have been completely impossible. As I got to the bottom, I could smell something dead, and I immediately knew it was Ace. He had not been touched by predators, but was heavily mutilated. He had the same mutation as cows, with the skin around their eyes being gone, as well as the skin around their lips. However, his back legs were completely free of flesh and was just bone. His rib cage was also opened up, with all of his organs being gone. As I looked around, I could see the skeletons of at least 3 cows, and it was obvious that this was some type of dumping ground for whatever did this. I was completely dumbfounded on what had happened. There was no way that Ace could have gotten here by himself, so he must have had to have been carefully placed here. I'd also like to mention that where he was found was a whole 2 miles away from the corral. Nothing was adding up, and besides, I had just lost my favorite horse. I sadly returned to the spot where me and my cousin's son were going to meet up, and we both rode back to the pickup. After talking to my cousin, we decided not to renew our lease. Our current lease will expire in 2022. My cousin's son spends a lot of time on the internet and thought it sounded very similar to what happened at Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. For the past months, I've been studying what happened, but have been unable to come up with a definitive answer. Today's second encounter. I'm sure people laugh when they hear stories like this, but I can't. I was face to face with what I can only describe as a werewolf in 1987 in southern Illinois. I was only 10, but I know what big dogs looked like, and I actually owned a huge St. Bernard at the time. This thing dwarfed him. I was walking alone down a road that parallels some thick woods when I heard some movement in the brush. I had stopped and looked toward the noise, and to my absolute horror, a huge black wolf-looking head came out of the brush and was looking at me. I don't know if it was on 2 or 4 legs, but it was taller than I was. I was 10, so maybe 4.5 feet or so. Suddenly it came bursting out of the woods towards me, and I thought I was dead. I don't know what happened at that point, but obviously it didn't grab me. All I can remember from that part is that it was in my face, and then it wasn't. My mom remembers seeing me running home with a look of terror, so she met me outside. She knew something bad had happened, but didn't know what. She says I was shaking uncontrollably. I had wet myself, and I kept saying, "A werewolf just tried to take me." She says that she doesn't know what I encountered, but I was a tough kid who always was outside and was not prone to making up stories. She said the next day I brought a book home from school titled Meet the Werewolf and became obsessed with anything werewolf related. I wouldn't go outside for a long time after that, even when all the other kids were outside. We moved the next year to a city 100 miles away, and I got back to normal again. I moved back to the same rural town when I was 18, and I've lived here since. It's a small town on Rend Lake in Jefferson County, Illinois. I know what I saw, and I'll never forget its face. This wasn't a dog. I go into the woods quite a bit alone, and sometimes I get a bit worried, but I also always carry a gun just in case. Be safe when alone in rural areas because these Dogman things are real. My late wife had a daytime encounter with what she called a 7-foot black werewolf standing on 2 legs in 2001, just about 5 miles from where I had my encounter. The only difference is that she was driving and had the relative safety of being in a car. It proved to me that they do exist and are in the area, so at least I know to be careful when in the woods instead of being like everyone else who doesn't have a clue until they are face to face with one. It's scary to know they are real, but I think it's better to be aware of them, so I know to take precautions when I'm in the woods. And I tell anyone who will listen despite being laughed at by some. But those who know me best know that I'm not crazy, and that I don't make up stories, so they believe me. I think telling them will keep them out of harm's way, or at least make them a little more cautious about being out there alone. My uncle had a Sasquatch encounter in '81 while in the outskirts of the Shawnee National Forest. He never went back and is afraid to be outside after dark, if there are any woods around. He's 60 now and still scared of things that don't exist. He's a huge guy himself, but is terrified of seeing that thing again. Funny thing is he actually laughed at me when I told him about my werewolf-looking thing. That almost got me. I think that he had thought I was joking at first, but I told him, just like Bigfoot that you imagined, and he changed his tune. He said it was probably a Bigfoot that I saw. It was most certainly not. It was a giant black wolf that was taller than me, not a gorilla-looking thing. Today's third encounter. I was traveling in the dark at work, and I'm on a military base in a gated area where it's pitch black except for a single light post near the gate. And you go outside to smoke. A wolf-like creature that was pitch black walked directly under the light so I could see it fully. I thought, cool, looks like a fox because of its thick black tail. But then I realized it's around the size of a wolf with really thin legs and a lot of hair hanging down its neck and tail. Its tail was dragging about a foot behind it. It stopped and turned its head slowly towards me, and all I saw was these shiny white eyes staring through me. I couldn't move until it looked away and did a 180 and went back into the shadows to where I couldn't see it. I slowly approached to go out to the gate. It had disappeared after I got outside the gate and locked it. I lit my cigarette and started smoking and decided to turn on my phone's flashlight and scan the fence line where it had gone. The area it had disappeared was a lot shorter than I originally thought, and the gate I went out only had about 20 feet before there was another gate cutoff area. The creature had disappeared, so while I was scanning slowly I saw nothing, but heard a whistle that sounded like it had come from not too far directly in front of me through the gate. I slowly backed up and got to my car. I have no idea what this thing was, what the whistle meant. Last I checked, there's no dog I know that's full black with long dragging tail that whistles in the middle of the night on a military base. Today's fourth encounter. In 1999, I was working at a state park in Pennsylvania. and I got to know the back areas of it pretty well, the areas most tourists didn't get to see. Approximately 1 mile from the park on a long dirt road was a large clearing in the woods, which was cleared for power lines and gas well use. Once you got out to that spot, you'd have to walk over a long hill until you came to an old abandoned trail. If you followed this trail, it would take you deep into the forest. One day I followed it and found that it led to an old dilapidated cabin, not on the park cabin records, and it looked like it hadn't been used in many decades. Even though it was daylight, I still got this creepy feeling that I shouldn't be there, and worse, that something was watching every move I made. A few weeks later, while I was off duty, 2 of my friends and myself were just out driving around enjoying the summer night, and since I knew all the back roads, I was taking them on kind of a tour. No, none of these roads are off limits or secret, so I wasn't breaking any rules. Other than that mysterious cabin, the park hasn't had any secrets. About 11 p.m., I came to that familiar clearing. I had mentioned something about an old cabin. Being a brave soul, I talked them into letting me show them the cabin. I grabbed a flashlight, and we took off down the hill and onto the path that led to the cabin. I took the lead and we walked halfway when all of a sudden my light flashed on something on the right side of the path. Almost immediately I stopped and said, "Did you guys see that?" To which they responded, "See what?" As I panned the light back to the right side of the road, I said, "That." There, standing by a tree, was a creature only seen in sci-fi movies. It had grayish olive-colored skin and was very thin in its extremities. The calves and forearm muscles were very large, as well as its chest. Its face was the strangest thing, since it had a typical alien gray head shape, but there was no mouth. It had a nose that was long and thin, but not longer than its chin. Its eyes were a reddish gleam in the light, but not the size of most reported aliens. Very small, even by human standards. I hate to make this reference for fear of questioning my sanity, but the best description I have is the goons that were in the Popeye cartoon. It leaned oddly against the tree, like if you were leaning on an armchair by only one arm. To make another TV show reference, but like the Fonz would lean on the jukebox in Happy Days, minus the legs being crossed. Immediately, everybody wanted to leave, but as we turned, my flashlight went out. My friends told me to quit messing with them and turned the light back on, to which I informed them that I wasn't messing with them and to keep moving now that I was at the back of the group. I frantically continued to beat my flashlight, trying to get it to work again. As soon as it came back on, I immediately swiveled back around to shine behind us. The creature had moved up significantly and was now on the left-hand side. We hurried up to the clearing, and once we got back up the hill into the main dirt road, things got worse. Out of the woods we had just come through was this high-pitched, blood-curdling screech noise, which, after it started, others started to answer back from the other side of the clearing. The fact that I was a park ranger, had been in the woods all my life, and had a degree from Penn State in wildlife management means I've heard a lot of noises in the wild, but have never heard a sound like that before. I know it was not any kind of owl, bobcat, bear, bird, porcupine. You get the drift. Once I told my dad about the encounter. He told me it could have been a chupacabra, which I had never heard of before, and as far as aliens go, never believed in them until recently. Months went by without incident. Other than not being able to shake that "I'm watching you" feeling, I was to the point of feeling like I was being stalked. One night I went out to get something for my truck when I looked into the woods and saw those reddish, glowing eyes staring at me from the shadows. I immediately ran into the house and grabbed the biggest knife. I'm not a gun guy. To which my dad asked me what I was doing. I told him I was tired of feeling stalked and was going to face this thing. He told me that he was coming with me, but all along I knew he never truly believed me or my encounter. When we got outside, he nonchalantly asked, "Okay, where did you see this thing?" And I pointed to the spot, to which he directed his flashlight, much to his disbelief. There it was, and as soon as the light hit it, tore off into the deep woods. My dad, an ex-Marine who served proudly during Vietnam, yelled at me to get back into the house with fear in his voice. To this day, it still creeps me out telling the encounter, and my hands shake even while I'm typing this to recall it. I'm now in my 30s with a wife and kids, but even now, when I go outside at night, I still feel watched to the point that when I get a really strong feeling, my wife won't let me leave the house without her. Just as a side note, for the first 5 years of our relationship, she too would catch sight of this creature, but mostly as it was going into the shadows. As a further note, if anyone is questioning it, there is no drugs, alcohol, or any other substance involved during this or any other encounter I've had. Today's second part of this bonus upload. My husband comes from a long line of outdoorsmen, hunters, fishermen, etc. He spends every weekend out exploring the land and also grew up in a dense forest. He's a proud skeptic, an actual earth scientist as profession. He doesn't believe in anything unless there's evidence to back it up. He says, as he's grown up in the woods for over 4 decades, if any of these things existed, he would have seen something by now. He told me an experience he had forgotten about last night while he was out in a national forest an hour north of us. He saw a strange group of 3 deer. The deer had long, bony, skinny bodies with weird, elongated legs and wolf tail. He said the tail part was so bizarre, strangely long and almost as long as their whole body, bushy, just like an extra-long German shepherd's tail. He said the deer's bodies did not look right, really gangly and disproportionate, but could not put his finger on what was so strange about them. The tail was what stood out the most. We then Googled deer species in the area and nothing matched the description. There are some deer with longer tails, but they don't exist in our area, and their tails are not bushy and long like a dog's tail. They are trim and stubby, like a regular deer's tail, just elongated. Basically, no such creature exists in our area or anywhere else. He said that he'd seen them once, and some time later saw them again. They were not moving, just watching him. Nothing else out of the ordinary happened that day. The first thought in my mind was shapeshifter, or Dogman. There's many accounts of weird half-deer creatures associated with shapeshifter or Dogman encounters. The thing is, he has had paranormal encounters but refuses to accept it was something out of the ordinary. He was in the middle of nowhere at night when a giant, totally black craft flew straight over him, covering the sky, making a weird pulsating sound, like a pulsating electronic hum. He thinks it was just simply an experimental aircraft and didn't think anything about it. Another time, when he was driving on an isolated country road at night, he and his passenger saw a very bright orange orb in the sky moving around. Suddenly, a cow appeared in the middle of the road out of nowhere, and they almost hit it. Once again, he assumes it was a planet he saw, and the cow had quickly run onto the road when they were not looking. And another time he saw a pair of yellowish-green glowing eyes watching him from the darkness pretty high up, 7 feet-ish, accompanied by some whistling. What he said was an eerie tune. This encounter is the only weird one he'll admit to. As he felt uneasy and ran back to find his car, this took place by a pond or a body of water. Regarding the strange wolf deer, does this sound familiar to anyone? Have they had an experience like this or heard about an experience like this? It seemed pretty strange to me, and my husband, who can properly identify any common animal, was very perplexed, as he had never seen anything like it in this area, or any wildlife book, period. He thinks it's nothing, but I definitely don't. Tonight's third part of the bonus. I'm from Trenton, Ontario, and I am currently scared. There's been so many occurrences of strange stuff happening, but today was just not it. I decided I was not going to sleep for school the following morning, as I sometimes do, but tonight I had a very, very odd vibe coming from my room's window. I'm usually not the type to be frightened by my window, but today I just couldn't look at it, and there was a haunting feeling coming from it. I kind of brushed it off, so I called a friend on Discord and played some video games. Where I play video games, the window is directly behind me, and I can generally hear what's going on behind me. About every 10 minutes, I would hear a clicking noise, 2 clicks to be precise, My room is on the second story, and there's no trees relatively close enough to create a noise. So each time I heard it, I would sort of try and make an excuse for it. Oh, it's just a squirrel or something, or maybe it's water. But after listening carefully each time, I came to notice that it was most definitely not that. Later on, at around 3:54 a.m., my friend left the call to sleep. I was just sort of vibing, watching TikToks, and then I started hearing a rapid tapping. The tapping was so mortifyingly human that I froze and continued to listen to the tapping. I then recognized a 5-finger tapping pattern. I was horrified. I sat for maybe 15 minutes straight, not looking anywhere but except where I froze. After calming myself down and finally letting myself breathe, I got up, not making eye contact with any wall or window, and I went to a room with no windows and vibrated for a bit. I finally went back to my room at around 5. I went and laid down on the bed, and as soon as my head hit the pillow, I heard a muffled howl bark come from the forest. Usually, I would just brush it off as my neighbor's dog Leela, but it did not sound like her. It didn't sound like Leela at all. It couldn't be wolves or coyotes because they never cross a certain part of the forest, which is surprisingly closer to the 401. At this point, I was really freaked out, and I just tried to continue my morning. That's really where the odd stuff ends for that night. But that was definitely not the first time this has happened. We have a really old house. My parents think it's ghosts, as they've heard things mock them, weird laser lights being pointed around our house, whispering, black shadows hovering over my crib, and an old British lady calling out names. See, I agree with all that, but I think the thing lurking in the forest by my window is different. Another weird thing that I've found is when we redid the insulation for my room, drywall underneath the insulation was 50s clothes, newspapers, and some weird signs like pagan spray painted in black and goat head and a bunch of gibberish words. We covered it all up, but it sort of haunts me to know what lies beneath the wallpaper. And the final bonus encounter. I'm 19, I know, a bit young to be credible, but I've seen some stuff. I've lived most of my life up to the age of 14 in Michigan. I lived in the St. Joe area, if anyone is familiar. Anyways, my grandparents lived in the northern part of Michigan, and we would regularly drive the 4 to 5 hours and go and visit them, either on our way to the lake house, which was a little further north, or just to visit. They lived in the middle of nowhere, 25 minutes from a town. Both of their neighbors were a mile in each direction, and their property was huge. They lived in a small trailer in the middle of that property. They had 2 pastures on each side of the property, and in the back they had miles of trails that would take you throughout the woods. My grandfather usually hunted out there. I was hitting golf balls from the front of the house into the pasture. I hit all my balls and went to collect them. I opened the gate and shut it behind me so none of the dogs could get through, and I walked around picking up my golf balls. A couple of them went further than normal, so I had to walk back behind the pasture area into the wooded part. As I was walking, I could hear leaves being crushed, but they were like a little off from my steps. I kept hearing this weird noise come from behind me, kind of like a watery sound, I guess. It was like someone had just gotten out of the shower and they were dripping wet, but this noise kept stopping and starting, so I just thought it was the wind blowing water out of the trees. I found my last ball and turned around and started to walk back and saw something tallish move behind a tree. I could tell it was taller than me, but didn't really know what it was. Being from Michigan, we've got our fair share of scary animals that would love to bite into your meaty flesh, but this was definitely not a wolf and could not have been a bear. So I kind of stood there frozen, just looking at the tree and bushes the thing was near. After a while, the thing started to creep out, and it crawled out on its hands and feet. First, I saw its long, skinny arms, which were followed by its head. It looked up and around and finally looked at me. It crawled the rest of the way out, and I could see its whole body. It had skinny arms, like it hadn't eaten in a while, dark-looking skin that had a shine like it was slimy. Its body was just a mass of flesh. It didn't look to have a stomach or a chest. It was just kind of twisted up and misformed. Its legs were just as long and messed up looking as its arms, and both the thing's feet and hands were elongated. Not massively or anything, but you could tell it was longer than your average human hand and foot. Its head was the part I have a real hard time pinpointing down. It had eyes, no hair, and a long mouth that didn't open. The nose was just two holes, and it had a very long, exaggerated chin, but it kind of looked normal in a way. It stared at me, and without opening its mouth, it made the sounds I had been hearing, which seemed to be made by its nose as the holes flared. It started to walk around, not at me, but just around where it was. Then it stood up on its two legs. It was probably 6.5, 7 foot tall, and its appearance made it look a lot scarier. The thing moved its neck in an unnatural way and then looked at me. It was only 25 yards away, way too close for comfort, but I was not about to move and have this creature charge me. All of a sudden, it just bolts right at me. My eyes open wide, just prepared, but it ran right by me and through the woods. I turned around, and sure enough, it just kept running, sometimes on all fours, sometimes on two legs. It's run both ways. It was unnatural. Its body contorted and just looked so off. I ran out of the pasture and shut the gate behind me again. I didn't tell my grandparents right away, but a couple of months later I did. This was in the summer of 2018. I didn't tell them till about fall of the same year. My grandfather pulled me aside after I told him and asked me what it looked like exactly. I told him, and he said, "I've seen it before on the trails." He didn't see anything more, just for me not to be worried. I haven't really told anyone but family and close friends about this, but I guess that has changed now. This really messed me up for a while. Scary thing is, too, I've seen it after several times in different places, never at my home, but anywhere up north. Even at the lake cabin, an hour away from my grandparents. This one was by far the scariest, though. I know it's not a skinwalker, at least it shouldn't be. I don't know, but does anyone possibly know what it may be? This took place 2018 in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. All right, folks, in my eyes, a great bonus upload. I hope you feel the same. Great encounters, some very interesting video. Just a good bonus all the way around. Guys, thank you for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that helps this channel to continue to grow and go. And honestly, what makes the place a special place for people to share their experiences, ideas, and theories, judgment and ridicule free. Just simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Thank you. Stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless.